Amusement park employees of Reddit. What is your horror story? I worked on the Dueling Dragons at Universal Orlando when in college. For those who don't know, the Dueling Dragons were two separate coasters that dueled and had several near misses with each other. They were pretty unique at the time and were super fun. As you can imagine, Universal told people to empty their pockets before they rode so that their phones and crap wouldn't fly out and smack somebody on the other coaster at 60 miles per hour. Of course, many times people would ignore this because they're lazy and stupid. I was working one day when the ride shut down completely. Change had flown out of someone's pocket and hit a guy in the eye, leaving him blind in that eye. The tragic part? The guy was already blind in his other eye, so now the guy is 100% blind. They didn't duel anymore after that, and the ride was left permanently much lamer. I still feel for the poor blind guy, but the irony is comedic in a dark sort of way. Edit, since a lot of people are asking, this happened in 2011. Dueling Dragons. I had the pleasure of riding this thing many times before it got rethemed to a Harry Potter ride and then ultimately shut down at Universal Orlando. Yeah, this roller coaster kicked ass, for sure. And I absolutely remember this story in the news about the guy being blinded by, some kind of shrapnel or something that came out of somebody's pocket during one of the near misses. Yeah, that was a really big deal, and they ended up, unfortunately, having to dumb it down after that. Definitely an unfortunate tale, but just wanted to shout out one of the former greatest roller coasters ever. And even though the Ice Dragon was the cooler concept, everyone knows that the Fire Dragon was the better roller coaster. Anyway, moving on. Story 2. Was working the first shift opening the park and doing dry runs with a roller coaster. Well, when it came back, there was obvious impact on the front car. One of the groundskeepers had headphones in listening to music working through his shift. He died instantly. The following week was a nightmare, and I still don't think to this day they found all of him. Story 3. I once had to height check a girl who was both mentally and physically disabled. This is just as they're about to get on the ride too, as someone else previously didn't bother to check her height to begin with. So I politely asked her and her carer to come and check her height after lots of no's, and as luck would have it, she wasn't tall enough. Of course. She didn't take it well and started screaming, saying she's going to ride no matter what. And after leaving to let the carer tell her to get out, she finally left her seat after about 10 minutes, which is an eternity in roller coaster time. I see her walking off. I mean, yeah, it sucks, but I'm just doing my job. I'm just relieved that she's finally going. And then, as she's walking through the exit, she turns around and screams, "I hope you die!" So that was nice. It was hilarious, but still soul-crushing at the same time. Also, it was my birthday. I quit not long after. Story 4. I operated a few different roller coasters during my fun-filled summers at this amusement park, but most of my horror stories come from one ride in particular. The train was one of the ones that you had to step into, with a lap bar restraint. On one particular day, it was over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and the ride had been running as usual for most of the morning. As we were loading the train, a guest came up to me to say that there was an awful smell coming from the front car, and my stomach immediately dropped. Usually with these types of complaints, we'd find that the previous rider had one too many slushies before riding and had lost their lunch. Gross, but we were used to cleaning that kind of stuff. I started approaching the front car and immediately called for my coworker to direct everyone out of the train and back into the line, and to call our supervisor to close the ride. Instead of a normal puke situation, I found a greenish-brown liquid spread all throughout the front car, from the seat down to the floor. Whoever was the last person to ride the ride had crapped all over themselves and hadn't bothered to tell anyone about it. Cleaning human feces is one thing. It's absolutely disgusting, but it can be done. But trying to clean up human diarrhea in 100+ degree weather off of the floor of a car where you had to kneel down and stick your head into the car to reach the very front is a situation that I never would have imagined even in my worst nightmares. The ride was down for the rest of the day, and it took over an hour to clean everything out of the car before we could start really sanitizing it. Story 5. Finally, one I can answer. I was working in an amusement park as a 19-year-old and was on the turnstile talking with guests and checking everyone off. About 3 in the afternoon, a very young girl, about 6 or so, came up with her father, both in swimwear. Not unusual, since there's a water park attached to the regular park. However, there is a rule in the park that you have to be wearing a shirt to ride the ride, and the girl was in a 2-piece suit. I informed the both of them that the girl needed a shirt, and we would be happy to save their spot in line if she had a shirt she could run and grab. Her father raised his voice and loudly asked why I was, quote, looking at his little girl, and shouted about me being a pedophile. I backed off and told him he misunderstood, but he kept shouting back to the line behind him about how I was a sicko, and only stopped when the park security arrived a few minutes later. One of 2 times I felt like I was actually in danger. The dude was furious. Story 6. Worked for an amusement park several summers as a teenager, and a haunted house at one, off and on. Neither park I worked at was a dry park, so drunk parents ranked among the worst. The haunted house was particularly fun, as later groups tended to involve drunks. I took a bad kick to the ribs once, while working under an overhang, and we had at least one violent incident a night. For further perspective, most of us were high schoolers and not at all that intimidating. For the actual amusement park, the most effed up thing was when I got sent home early once for a bit of weather coming, which wasn't that odd. Said I should have time to get home though. I lived a half hour away. What I didn't know was I got sent home in a tornado warning. The warning was posted when they sent me home. They knew the line of storms was about to hit. I ended up pulling over after a tree branch hit my car and got stuck in a hailstorm. The roof of my car was dented. No tornado actually touched down, but we had bad straight-line winds. A few other employees were also told to go home and had pretty similar stories of trying too. The woman working the office that day just decided, on her own, we'd be better off going home than staying in the fairly solid, permanent buildings on the premises. AKA, once we were gone, not her problem. Story 7. I'm not an employee, but was a resident of the area at the time. At Busch Gardens, Virginia, a few birds got in the way of a moving coaster train during its grand opening and hit the supermodel Fabio in the face. The news was there to cover the inaugural celebrity ride, but all they'd show for a while was the train returning to the station and Fabio with a face full of blood. Story 8. Not really a horror story, but it was scary to me. I worked at a children's amusement park and they had me operating the Ferris wheel, which is a rough ride to operate. You have to balance it and put people on of similar weights on opposite cars, so it's a lot of stopping and loading before letting it go around a few times. As you can imagine, it's difficult for a teenager to explain to an overweight couple why they can't get on the ride when the other person on the ride is a skinny kid. I was supposed to only be on the ride for 2 hours. They left me there for 4 hours in direct sunlight with no breaks. After 4 hours on a busy day with no water and no break and getting sick of having fat people yell at me for not being able to get on immediately, I lost track of whether it was balanced. I wound up making it go backwards and people freaked the F out. That's happened before, but I was usually able to stop it before it went all the way around. Not this time. I physically didn't have the strength. Luckily, the owner was around and stopped it. People were pissed. When my supervisor came to see what happened, I said, "That's what happens when you leave someone on this ride for 4 hours. No idea how I didn't get fired. No one was hurt, but they sure as F were terrified. Story 9. Lifeguarding at this lazy river tube pool. Basically, just tell kids to get back in their tubes all day. These two guys, like 30 years old, are arguing in Polish or something, floating all around the lazy river. They are on lap 2 or 3 of arguing and really going at it. One of them pulls a knife out of his trunks and stabs the other guy's tube. He walked around to the end with his pop tube while guy with the knife proceeds to just hop all the different fences to get out of the park and is not seen again. Did no one check bags at the door, at the entrance, before you even buy tickets? That's a thing. Should be. How'd he get in there with a knife? Why is it in the pool? So many questions. Story 10. I used to drive the monorails at Disney World. We could take up to 4 people with us in the front of the monorail. All they had to do was ask for the nose. One time I was at Epcot Center and this family of 3 got on board. They all seemed to be in a good mood, and as we're traveling, the son said, "Daddy, I don't feel so good." And the father said to him, "What did you do? Eat too much junk food?" Just then, I noticed the kid began to hurl. The father just shoved a t-shirt in the kid's mouth, and it was spraying out the sides like a busted water pipe. All over the floor was brown water and chunks of hot dogs. The smell was killing all 3 of us. When we pulled into the station at the Transportation and Ticket Center, there were a few good-looking girls waiting to get in the nose. But me, being the lucky guy that I am, when the doors opened and they could smell it, everybody on the platform just ran away from the train. The family was so apologetic, but it took a while to get that smell out of the train. Story 11. So Six Flags has a lot of really dumb rules for their employees, which causes there to be a crazy high turnover rate. That, on top of the fact that on this particular day, it happened to be the hottest day of the summer in New England, meant that after having only worked there for 2.5 weeks, I was the most senior person in my department of Kidsopolis. This means I have to run the whole operation schedule for my department and tell everybody where to go and what to do all day. Keep in mind, I don't even know half these people's names. On top of that, nobody knows how to operate the freaking Zoom jets. So my supervisor grabs me first thing in the morning and tells me he's going to teach me how to operate this ride. Things are going great when, about halfway through this training, my supervisor passes out because it's like 110 degrees. So now I'm supposed to be leading this department full of people I don't know while operating a ride I don't know how to operate, and if I have any questions, then I have no one to ask because my supervisor is unconscious somewhere. Meanwhile, I'm getting calls and someone's like, "Hey, so Sally passed out in the splish splash zone?" And I'm just like, who the F is Sally? Julie is calling me and telling me she's feeling dehydrated and needs to go on break, and I'm like, listen, I've got Julio trying to operate the crazy cups and the wacky wagons at the same time. What makes you think we have enough staff to let you go on break? Fast forward to the end of the day. I've had 3 people faint because of the heat. I still don't know most of my coworkers' names, but I did get yelled at in Spanish over the phone a lot. And because I felt bad that nobody got enough time on break, I told everyone they could go home and I'd sweep up the department on my own. I got pretty good at the Zoom jets though. Story 12. Used to work at an amusement park that had a section featuring actors dressed as characters from a certain family-friendly show. The actors for this area were almost exclusively teenagers and were notorious for effing all around the dressing room, bathroom / backstage areas. This all culminated in 2 of the actors being fired for getting in a fight during a show because a certain cookie-loving monster made a sex tape with a certain Spanish-speaking monster who was dating a certain television-loving monster. Not really scary for me, but I think a few children were traumatized seeing a costume character's head ripped off during a show. Story 13. Many moons ago, I was an assistant director of training security at a park known for its cartoon mice. While doing the walk around the park with a group of new hires, I got a call about a possible indecent exposure incident in Fantasyland. Knowing that was the most popular place for children in the park, so much more than Toontown, I rushed the new hires through the backstage area to cut travel time. While we were backstage behind the Small World ride, one of my trainees pointed out someone dropping their pants and leaning against the building. Before we had a chance to close the distance between us and the guy, a blast of brownish yellow liquid exploded outwards in a fan pattern. I stopped the group, got on the radio, and informed them of the bio incident, then slowly made my way to the guy. When I was about 10 feet from him, he looked up, smiled, then blasted the wall again. Without a word, he pulled up his pants and started to walk away. His pants were soaked with liquid, crap, and piss. Before he was able to leave the area, Anaheim police apprehended him. After questioning him, they called for an ambulance. Upon talking with the police sergeant, found out he was a well-known homeless man in the neighboring city of Orange, usually picked up for swinging his dick at traffic. The kicker, though, was he wasn't the subject of the initial call. When we finally got to Fantasyland, we figured out that someone was complaining about a woman breastfeeding. 3.5 years of working there, and that is one of the events that still feels fresh in my mind. Story 14. I was at a firm in Williamsburg, and we represented the Fan family. Timothy Fan was killed in 1999 after dropping out of the Shockwave ride at King's Dominion. He was really small for a 20-year-old, but hit the pavement like a 500-pound man. The photographs of his body were unbelievable. The family lost because King's Dominion somehow found witnesses who stated Fan was intentionally loosening his restraints to be able to raise his hands on the coaster. I don't know if anyone is familiar, but the Shockwave is a standing coaster. For someone to want to lift their hands is absurd, and that there were actually witnesses who saw him do it is preposterous. Story 15. A huge storm was coming. I was operating the railroad at the time. Unfortunately, we left the station right before they were able to call us to close the ride. So as we were on our way, suddenly there was a huge downpour. Upon arriving at the station, we were immediately directed to an employee shelter. Now, this is where even more of the interesting stuff happened. 1. People were stranded at the station away from the entrance, wanting to ride back. I had specifically warned that the ride can close at any time before people boarded. 2. We were told that we cannot suggest any shelter because that would make the park responsible. And 3. A baby in a stroller was abandoned in the storm near the kid area. Yeah, no excuse at all for point 3 there. Abandoning a baby in a stroller in the middle of a storm, they need defacts called on them. What the hell? Story 16. I was a caricature artist for Six Flags, and one day had a dad and his son come up and wanted a drawing of the two of them. Now, the way caricature pricing worked was we would charge per person in the drawing. The father and son wanted a simple black and white headshot of the two of them, and a black and white headshot was $10. So for the two of them, it would be $20 before tax. I very clearly explained this to them, asking several times, "Are you okay with the ending price?" And they excitedly accepted. Fast forward to me ringing them up at the register. I tell them the total, 24 something. The father's happy and friendly demeanor quickly dissipates, and he begins arguing with me about the pricing. I calmly explain the situation with pricing and apologize if I wasn't clear enough, and gently remind him that he understood and agreed, otherwise I wouldn't have done the drawing. Big mistake. He gets angrier and starts yelling at me, cursing me out for lying and overcharging them to put a few more coins in my pocket. He accuses me of preying on parents and their children, thinking I can take advantage of them because, quote, they're stupid effers. He tries to take the drawing without paying, and when I hold it back and tell him he can't, he throws a $10 bill at me and snarls that's all he's going to pay. That I'm worthless and my drawing isn't even good and doesn't deserve any more than that. I'm really upset at this point, and I hand him the drawing wishing him a good day. "F you," he yells in response. The whole time his son is standing there, looking embarrassed and terrified. The dad proceeds to pace back and forth in front of my stand, alternating between coming back to the counter and yelling at me and chasing customers away, screaming at them about how I'm, quote, stealing money and how the stand is a huge effing ripoff. Thankfully, his charade lasted all of 20 minutes and police finally got him out of there. Left me pretty shaken though. I had to take my break early and cried over my lunch. Story 17. I was working security at a theme park when I was 18. One evening, one of the roller coasters that was stopped in the station got rear-ended by another. There were some injuries, nothing severe, thankfully. I did, however, end up staying all night, after the park had closed, sitting on the coaster to ensure no looky-loos or news media tried to get access to the cars. It was dark, creepy. I was 18 in a closed, deserted amusement park. Story 18. I worked at Block Party, which was an adult amusement place created by Blockbuster and only had 2 locations. Think Dave & Buster's, but with an adult-sized McDonald's-style playground, motion simulator and stuff. Unlike most others ITT, this is not a story of death or dismemberment. It is the stuff nightmares are made of, though. The scene is the power grid, the aforementioned playground in the dark with a techno soundtrack pumping in the background. You get to climb up inclines, explore different themed rooms like a color-changing room and a mirror room to crawl through. There are slides to take you out of the thing or into the ball pit. Oh, hell yeah, there's a ball pit. Really cool thing, except when the unthinkable happens. There are a couple of cast members working in there, usually one at the front and one roaming. If I recall correctly, I was floating, basically covering the brakes, and yes, I was covering the power grid as the time of the event. I was covering the entrance and was going to roam after the coworker I was covering got back. So there I am, helping guests get their card and the turnstiles right, because following the arrows is hard, and telling them the rules. After that is watching them take off their shoes and lock them up. Now that the scene is set, on to the event. I got a complaint about a really bad smell in there and had the roam to try to find it. There was only one way to do that crawl through it yourself. She did find it in the mirror room and reported it to the manager. The manager went to find out what was up. The manager could not tell what the source was since it was so dark. I went to the control panel and turned on the overhead halogens so she could have a better look. I'm told she became real religious as the light hit the mirrors up there and screamed out, "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph!" I cannot confirm this as her prayer could not be heard over the thumping of the bass line being blasted through the speakers. It turns out someone had smeared crap on the mirrors and floor of the room. Literal human crap, and people had been crawling in it, getting it on their clothes, and spreading it throughout the apparatus. We had to close the attraction down for the crap to be cleaned up. People are gross. Story 19. I worked at a water park when I was in high school. Not the sort of amusement park most people think of, but still an amusement park. The park had lots of large pools with a shallow section and a deep section separated by rope. For some reason, parents thought that their kids splashing around in the shallow end qualified them to swim in the deep end. When you're a lifeguard, you're supposed to scan the pool every 30 seconds to check on everyone. 30 seconds is a long effing time. On more than one occasion, a kid would wander over into the deep end. They would be okay for a few seconds, but would panic and start drowning. Unlike what you see in the movies, someone drowning is a fast, silent affair. Splashing is the exception, not the rule. Usually, it didn't take too long to spot someone drowning. The problem was that when a guard blew the whistle and jumped in the water, people would start flailing like chickens with their heads cut off. Unless the pool was nearly empty, this significantly slowed things down. And then there's the people that try to help. Unless you're a qualified guard, stay out of the way. On more than one occasion, kids got pulled from the water pretty damn near death. Giving a kid CPR is not a pretty sight. One kid did die during the time I worked there. Thankfully, it was on a day off. Story 20. Worked at a water park. Witnessed a man at the wave pool that would pull down his trousers and rub his junk up against little kids that were isolated from their parents. It was absolutely horrific and disgusting to witness. Of course, I had to report it to security, and they thankfully had a camera at the front of the pool. Allowed for more evidence than just he said, she said testimony. Had to go to court to testify. They actually admitted to it at the end of it all, which I don't know if that sickens me even more. Needless to say, I'm glad I did the right thing and reported it, because anyone could have easily just missed it or even ignored it. Edit. I have the article of the event. Not entirely sure if posting it is ethical since it gives the water park's name and the guy's name. I'm pretty sure the guy had to register as an offender after that, which means that his name's on that registry anyway. So yeah, go ahead, share the article. People need to know who this creep is so that they can punch him in the face when they see him in public. Story 21. I used to be an operations lead on the Jurassic Park ride at Universal Studios Hollywood. One day, I'm working the dispatch board, JP3, sitting in the operations booth when a phone rings. The lead manning the cameras answers, then suddenly slams the emergency stop button, shutting the entire ride down. We'd stopped for a moment so we could offload a disabled guest, and some brain surgeon was annoyed at the delay. So he lifted his kid out of the boat and sent him to call the booth from the emergency phone right next to the Jeep drop effect, which back then was still functional. If we hadn't been shut down, the kid very well could have been killed. We evacuated the ride and stayed down for 5 hours because we couldn't get the water pumps back up and running. Dad and family were escorted from the park, sans refund, though they pitched a fit. Another time, we had a couple of kids running around and assaulting the costume characters and then taking off. We had rough descriptions, and I just happened to be at the front entrance while a character was walking around. I saw one of them making a running approach on the mascot and threw a nasty block into him as he tried to pass me. He went down hard and stayed down when another escort dropped on top of him. He and his buddy were arrested, and I got a nice bonus for stopping them. Story 22. I worked as an attraction CM for a Disney park, and my main ride had a height requirement. It wasn't a bad one either. If you were about 4 to 6 years old, you met the height. It wasn't a roller coaster, so there was no fear of the kid flying out of their seat. But because of the nature of the ride, they physically had to sit upright in their seats without assistance and no lap sitting. The amount of times I've seen people try to sneak their infants on the ride is astounding. It got to the point where I stopped trying to be nice and would just straight up tell people that their babies would be seriously injured. I would have parents jokingly smack their infant's head into the height bar and tell me, "Ha ha ha, they're tall enough now." Like, this ride wasn't dangerous enough to cause shaken baby death or anything like that, but it also wasn't a freaking Fantasyland ride. Story 23. I worked at an amusement park where one of our goals was to guest relate as much as possible. One day, a kid told me hello after looking at my name tag. The name wasn't correct except for the first letter. I was having a pretty rough day, and I replied half-heartedly, without even really thinking, "Can you read, man?" His mother then told me his kid was blind in one eye. I meant to apologize, but instead asked, "Oh, he is?" It was a girl. Story 24. I worked for one summer at a NASCAR speed park, and it was probably the craziest summer of my life. So many injuries, but nothing ever happening. When working the go-kart tracks, if there was a wreck, you were expected to run across the tracks, dodging cars, and unlodge the stuck car, all before more cars zoomed past. The worst day, though, was the 4th of July, watching a man have a heart attack because I was the first person to get to the car when it stopped and had to wait with him until an ambulance showed up. Story 25. This doesn't necessarily have to do with working in an amusement park, but it did happen in one. I worked in food and sometimes had to cover stations that weren't my home station. The one time I got put into a Dippin' Dots truck. Everything was fine for a while, but nobody was checking in on me. I had to pee so bad, but I was really busy and I couldn't close down to go to the bathroom. Well, it got so bad that I ended up peeing myself. Of course, 30 seconds later, someone from security came in and asked how I was doing. I pretty much said that I peed and bolted. Told my manager I was sick and clocked out and left. I was mortified. It gets worse. Like 3 years later, I was on my senior trip for high school, and a bunch of us were sitting around talking about jobs we'd had. This one guy, that was pretty mean, started talking about how he had to clean up pee in a Dippin' Dots truck because some asshat peed himself. He said that it was in the summer after 9th grade, and he was pretty sure it was by the little kids section, which was where I was. I had never felt like I had such a weighted secret in my life before. Now I think it's funny, but I still have never told anyone that happened, lol. Story 26. Working a high school night at a Midwestern amusement park. Some dude decides to climb the large structure in the middle of the park. It resembles a tower in France. He is beyond all protected barriers and watches an elevator go up, and continues to climb. Since he, at this point, is already a genius, he forgets about the 6,000-pound counterweight that is careening down at him at 40 miles per hour. Dude is cut in half, and one half is pink jello. Yes, all hell breaks loose. Body covered in sheets that are billowing in the wind since they're 150 feet above ground. Then, of course, operations continued normally. Story 27. During one summer in high school, I got a job at an amusement park/water park. I was trained on the kiddie rides and worked them for about 2 weeks before they moved me to the adult rides. The problem was, they didn't train me on any of the rides. But most of the time, all you needed to know is which button starts the ride. One day, I'm working these swings, the ones that go around and up pretty high. I start the ride when a sudden thunderstorm hits. Lightning all around, and I've got like 20 or 30 people locked into a lightning rod screaming. I had no idea how to stop the ride. As luck would have it, my supervisor from the kiddie rides happened to be on the ride at the time. As she would come around, she'd try to yell directions at me. Mind you, the ride is only like 3 or 4 minutes, but that feels like an eternity when you're in a scary situation. So finally I figure out which button she's telling me to push. I push it and the ride stops. Yeah! But it's now stopped at its highest point, and it's not coming down. I just started pushing buttons like crazy until finally it started to move down. As people got off the ride, they were crying, hugging, and giving me horrible looks. As soon as they were all off, I got down from the big metal podium I was on just as my actual supervisor arrives and tells me I'm not allowed to get down from my post until someone else comes around and tells me I can. My supervisor was pissed at me for daring to get out of the thunderstorm without permission. I don't remember what I said next. I just remember walking out through security, telling them I quit. I was shaking, so upset. I was responsible for those people on the ride, and they could have been seriously hurt. Story 28. Well, at my park, we had these duck-themed paddle boats. The late-night shifts made this particularly scary. Anyways, I was working the ducks and tied up all the boats and went to check out. But I forgot the ride register, so I went back to get it. And when I got there, 2 of the boats had drifted out into the middle of the lake. I figured it was just that I effed up the knots, so I had to get my manager so he could use the motorboat to go and get them. But he just looked at me dead on and said, "Leave them alone," and checked me out. The next day, those 2 boats were gone and replaced with spares we had. I know this sounds like a crappy horror story, but it's probably the scariest experience I've had. Story 29. I have a different take on the question. I might have mentioned the story before, but oh well. I worked at the Forbidden Journey ride in its 2nd year. We had worked out a lot of kinks of getting the lines to work at their best, and we were getting close to having a perfect hour. This meant the ride not stopping and getting a body into every seat. The park had to be busy, the line sorters had to be on their game with single riders, height checks, and larger guests. It was a lot of parts that had to work perfectly to even be a possibility. Well, we were 50 minutes into the hour and got told that we were very, very close to achieving it. It's one of those things that everyone gets really, really excited for when you're in the moment. 2 minutes pass. 4 minutes. Still good. At 57 minutes, I remember it vividly, our boss's boss comes to me. I'm at the start of the ride platform, and tells me to be ready to send a VIP. He knew what was happening with our perfect hour, so I knew it was a big deal for him to be risking it to get a VIP through the line, especially when we had a secondary platform to send them from. At 59 minutes, he gives me the signal to hold the line and tells me that Paris Jackson and her brother are getting on. The problem is, they said we were ready and they weren't. It took them over half of that last minute to get from the special door to the ride while we held guests back out of their view, and we had 68 empty seats while they tried to get their crap together. Not only did we not achieve our perfect hour, that was our worst count of the day. Story 30. Typical not a worker, but when I was much younger, I was walking out of Disneyland pretty late one night. They were having a lot of problems with the Rocket Rods ride at the time, and I guess were testing it at night. As we walked under a part of the track, something large flew off and smacked down hard. My dad made sure to find a few cast members and tell them, and the ride was permanently closed not long after. A year or so later, I was bemoaning the fact that it was permanently closed and I never got to get on it when a mother and daughter walked up and said I was lucky I hadn't been on it. The last time they had ridden it, it had broken down, and while they were waiting, the seatbelt suddenly started tightening. They ended up having to be cut out of the car. All of the issues I've heard/read about the ride, the seatbelt one has never come up, though others have mentioned things coming off it before. Yeah, the Rocket Rods. I rode that one time too. I think it was like late 90s, early 2000s at Disneyland. That ride was jacked up. They basically took a roller coaster and put it on the old People Mover track, which was a slow omni-mover type ride, right? So the structure was not built to support like a high-speed roller coaster type ride, and I just remember getting like horrible whiplash from that ride, in addition to having to wait. Now, again, I was a lot younger, but man, it took probably 2.5, 3 hours to get on that ride because it kept breaking down, technical difficulties while we were in line. That ride was an absolute nightmare, and I'm glad they shut it down. Story 31. Worked at a large amusement park in the Tampa Bay area. 2 stories come to mind. The coaster I worked on had no floors, and someone's change from the front row fell out of their pocket and hit the person in the back row near their eye. Coaster came back with a lady bawling and blood all over her face. The second was someone threw up all over our elevator in 100-degree heat, with no AC. I drew the short straw in cleaning that up. Story 32. I worked retail with a guy who'd worked summers at an amusement park in the Midwest. He'd been the ride operator for a fairly small, tame roller coaster. The previous summer, a high school kid had gone on it with some friends and had been unconscious when the ride stopped. My coworker called for the medics and performed CPR until they got there. The kid was DOA at the hospital. My coworker said he still beat himself up about it sometimes. I told him not to. The incident had made the paper in my hometown because the kid who died was getting ready to go to my former high school, and it was well known that most of his siblings had died young. He was something like the 5th of 6 or 4th of 5 to die before the age of 25, from a congenital heart defect. The last sibling didn't have it. That warning on roller coasters about don't ride if you have a heart condition? Yeah, they mean it. The kid died, and the guy I worked with had to live with the aftermath of it. The family tried to sue him in the park, but it didn't go anywhere once he told the lawyers the kid knew he had a heart defect and shouldn't have been on the ride in the first place. Story 33. Working monorails at Disney Orlando Contemporary Hotel Station. A kid, 11 or so, gets on the train with his family, has an asthma attack, and goes from bad to horrifying as the parents have no inhaler or magic medical fix. We contact Park EMR immediately, but it seems to take them forever to get up to the platform in the hotel. Kid struggles breathing, gets worse, starts turning an alarming purple shade, sprays crap all over his shorts, and stays conscious and terrified looking the whole time as the parents and my coworkers look on helplessly. EMR gets there. Within 3 minutes, they sort him out good as new, sans crappy shorts. Asthma is scary. I've had asthmatic bronchitis before where I needed a dilator inhaler, but I never struggled to breathe more than a few seconds. Poor kid. It was awful. Story 34. Not the amusement park employee, but I was one of the kids that smashed her head open at a water park as a kid. When I was small, 8 I think, back in the early-ish 80s, we used to spend a good portion of our summers down at Ocean City, Maryland, which had some good water slides. One of those was attached to the Jolly Roger amusement park. Back then, no one really believed in anything like guardrails or rules or non-kid stuff in the pool stairs. So, we're all sliding, then you splash into a fairly small pool, climb out, start over. only you have to climb out up those mossy, algae-covered, slimy steps as people 2 and 3 times your size are hurtling down the slides into the pool. Every time this happens, huge waves of water overtake you. Hard enough as is, right? As I'm attempting to climb out, my pint-sized self gets barreled over by some huge dudes, ladies, who knows, on a big, gross, slimy foam mat, right into the cement pool edge, gashing my head open. Blood everywhere. Do you know how much a head wound bleeds? A lot. Even more so in pool water, apparently. All I remember is the blood in my hair, I have a lot of hair, and it all being matted together and freaking out because, oh hell no, not more stitches. I had to get my head sewn up, and we got free park passes for the summer. I rode a lot of stupid rides that summer, and have a scar on my head to show for it. The 80s were a fascinating time. Story 35. Not an amusement park, but go-karts. Worked at an indoor go-kart place for years. One big safety rule is not to bump the carts. The track is wide enough for one cart to pass another, but the fact is, they're not bumper carts and people get hurt all the time by bumping into each other. Worst example I can remember. A dad and his kid started bumping mid-race. Track guys stopped the carts to give them their first warning, brought them back up to speed. They tried it again and had a bad crash. Head-on collision, one cart on top of the other. Not only did it damage both carts, but it damn near sliced the kid's foot off. An ambulance was called and he got 13 stitches. We had to paint the concrete track to cover the bloodstain. Always follow the rules, kiddos. Story 36. We used to hang out in the parking lot after work and all talk. We watched many a ride start up with no one around and shut off. We watched the Wildcat coaster turn on suddenly and climb the hill halfway. From our spot, we could see the ride operator's booth was empty and it was way after hours, and no one but us and the park security was there. I also believed there was homeless people living in the park that would come out at night. I got a bunch of stories about that place. Everything from ride accidents to lost special needs people. Story 37. Not me, but my guy friend worked a summer at the amusement park portion of the water park. It was a water/amusement park combo. He was assigned to a log flume ride where, at the top of the ride, it takes your picture, and when you're done, you can purchase it. He was supposed to man the picture purchase stand. At one point, this family went on, the guy at the top took their picture, and then the wife came up to my friend screaming that it was a horrible picture and that she demanded he retake it. He had to explain that he didn't take pictures, just ran the stand where people can purchase them. All the while, her husband, 2 daughters, and son just watched in dumbstruck and awe as she claimed he was trying to get her to buy the picture. Eventually, another employee at the park noticed and defended my friend, and ushered the wife away, warning her that if she did that again, she would be escorted out of the park. Her husband apologized for the incident, and my friend simply smiled and told him it wasn't a problem. He also ended up giving the picture to the husband for free when he asked for it. I managed to ask him if he was working there again this summer, and he said, "No, I don't think I could handle it. I'll work at the grocery store or something." Story 38. Back during my first season working at a local amusement park. I wasn't the operator of this ride at the time, but a mentally challenged man riding a ride called the Rainbow had suddenly panicked and decided he needed to get off the ride while it was running. The restraints on that ride are quite restrictive, so it takes some effort to get out of them, especially for a full-grown man. Somehow, he slips out of them and stands up. The operator sees this as soon as it happens and hits the emergency stop. Unfortunately, the force of the ride stopping caused him to lose his balance, and the dude fell about 40 feet to his death in front of a huge line of horrified guests and a traumatized ride operator. The operator kept working at the park, but transferred to retail after that. Here's the story, and they post a link to the story there. My own personal story happened a couple years later. Denver, during the mid to late summer, has a monsoon season, where almost every day about 4 p.m., a very intense thunderstorm rolls through town. Hail, lightning, thunder, tornado sirens, the works. The storm moves so fast that it only lasts about 20 minutes before it moves on. One day, the storm had hit the park, and as per usual, we shut down all the rides and helped the guests find shelter from the hail and wait it out. During this time, lightning had actually struck one of the rides, specifically the wave swinger ride that spins around with people on swings. Fortunately, nobody was anywhere near the ride when the lightning struck. However, the power surge had caused the ride to start up on its own, and it was moving at a faster speed than it was originally designed to. All the ride ops, including me, for the surrounding rides were taking shelter with some guests at another ride, as we're watching this ride suddenly start up and spin out of control. The ride's assigned operator was freaking out. She had the key in hand and everything, and suddenly we all started wearing a lot of exclamations over the radio as supervisors and managers thought someone was at the ride. Mind you, it is hailing this whole time. Unfortunately, I had to run out there, dodging hail and lightning, to hit the emergency stop button on the ride and shut it down. The ride ended up being shut down for quite some time after that. Story 39. In 1988, I was working park facilities at the now sadly defunct Geauga Lake Amusement Park near Cleveland. Park facilities is a nice euphemism for janitor. We emptied the trash cans, swept the midway, and cleaned the restrooms. The latter was my least favorite duty. I'm a minor clean freak, so cleaning dirty toilets makes me uncomfortable in best situations, and this was far from the best. At least once a day, some kid who was barely potty trained would clog the toilet by using what seemed like a full roll of toilet paper. You had to plunge the bowl, then go in with your hands and pull the soggy, soiled tissue out in clumps. And of course, there were the various accidents, where number 1 or number 2 didn't make it where it was supposed to go. It was already pretty disgusting normally, is what I'm saying. So one day, I'm on toilet duty, when someone gives me a head up that some kid had an accident. Oh, great. Well, better suck it up and get it over with. I head into the restroom and open the stall. Inside was a fecal horror show. There was poop everywhere. No, like literally everywhere. There was poop on the floor, there was poop smeared on the walls, there was poop on the toilet paper holder, there was poop on the back of the toilet, and, of course, the toilet was clogged solid with toilet paper, and yes, more poop. Whatever had happened there had been a literal crap show. Young me was more than a little shaken by the sight and the smell, but I shoved my stress to the back of my mind and spent the worst 30 minutes of my life up to that point getting that stall clean. Finally, I found the employee who had alerted me to the problem and told him it was all clear. "Did you clean the other one?" he asked. I laughed at the weak joke. Like, something like that could possibly happen twice at the same time. He wasn't smiling. Okay, fine, I thought. I'll go look. I mean, clearly he's joking, right? Yeah, the kid is obviously freaked out by having to clean so much crap. Let's tell him there's more. It wasn't a joke. A stall or two down, the identical twin of what I just cleaned was sitting there, mocking me. For the only time in my life, I had a nervous breakdown. I hid in the nearest closet and just cried for 5 minutes. Once I'd finally pulled myself together, I went back in and cleaned the second stall. And yes, I was paranoid that there might be a third. To this day, I don't know how that was possible. A pair of identical twins with IBS and synchronized colons? Did some kid have so much poop in him that he did both stalls? Story 40. I have 2. There is a resident idiot that helped with maintenance before the park opened for the day. One of his jobs was piling the roller coaster track. This involved riding the coaster with this oil can thing and squirting oil on the track as it went around. For one part, you needed to be in the front car. For another, you had to be in the back seat. So, normal process was to ride it once in the front car, then switch to the back car and ride it again. Instead, this dumbass decides to jump from the front car to the back car while he was at the top level of the ride. He missed, fell 3 stories, and landed flat on his back. Unfortunately, he landed on 3 concrete stakes that were used as part of the tie-down structure. They pierced him in 3 different locations, as in, had to be cut off, him pulled off of them, before they could take him to the hospital. Miraculously, none of them went through any of his internal organs, and none hit a major vein or artery. He ended up fully recovering. The amusement park was the place which did the fireworks show every year for the 4th of July. It was a big public park with a lake, and the fireworks were set off by some of the employees from an island in the middle of the lake. During the show, one of the guys accidentally kicked over a rack of launch tubes right as one of the mortars was firing. It lobbed right into the crowd and exploded in the middle of the crowd. There were several injuries, and one little girl lost her hearing permanently. I was in the crowd on the other side of the lake, and I saw it hit. Really messed with the guy's head who kicked the rack over. He was the owner's grandson. Between that and several other things that happened that year, including the owner trying to cut the locks off the gates to the public park to open them, he forgot that he agreed to close the park for one weekend so that a scene from Born on the 4th of July could be shot in an amphitheater right across from the park. The park crapped down for good at the end of that season. It was pretty sad. Story 41. I worked in the games division of my local theme park. Basically, you stand inside a sweltering hot booth for roughly 8 hours a day, screaming stuff about how great your prizes are into a mic set. I worked one of the more popular games during the Minions craze, and it was a nightmare. It was one of those water race games where you shoot a target with water and try to get it to the top first. The only thing I had control over was pushing the on button once I turned on every player's gun. This is going to be long, but let me take you on a journey. 1. People threw fits because they wanted their favorite minions, and even if it was the same minion in a different pose, it wasn't good enough. I had multiple people reject the same minion plush because it was waving. 2. When we would run out of the more popular prizes, people would become violent and attempt to tear down the display in a desperate attempt to get their favorite plush. All they had to do was come back in about 20 minutes and all the prizes would be brought over from the warehouse. 3. Being called an idiot in front of many very young children by an adult woman because she deliberately put herself on a broken gun, despite me informing her that it wouldn't work. She demanded a refund. 4. 2 adults doing a protest march outside my booth because they lost and wanted a prize. 5. Being told by an adult man that he would kill and SA me for, quote, making him lose. He was in front of his child. 6. Getting cussed out by a mother because she tried to make her kid take a crap behind my booth and I asked her not to. The bathroom was 5 feet away. 7. Being stalked during the first week of my working there. Thank you, undercover security. 8. Had a man wait until the park closed, then follow me out through the employee exit. I didn't even know he was following me until security stopped me and told me to stay with them while he was escorted out. 9. Not my division, but I worked in the area where the health code inspector came for a vacation and actively decided to write up one of our hot food places because it was a, and I quote, human rights violation. Servers actively passed out in the heat and the serving booth didn't have any windows or ventilation. 10. I worked there for 3 years. First week of the new season, I get a throat infection from yelling. Call in, go to the doctor. Doc tells me to get 3 days rest or I'll F up my throat. Call work back. Tell them about my absence. Return to work. Provide doctor's note. A few days later, I get slapped with a warning for being unreliable. I refused to sign the document because I provided a doctor's note and they knew about the absence. They return a few days later and say, you know, you really shouldn't make trouble. It'll be a lot easier if you sign. I refuse to sign. They proceed to take my phone and lock me into my booth. I asked to call my mom and was denied. I asked to call my lawyer and was denied. I wasn't allowed to run my game. I wasn't allowed to use the bathroom. I ended up signing the paper, but in the comment section, I wrote down the situation. Management hated me after that and did everything they could to get me fired. I quit a week later. And of course, the usual being called a crap bag or a scammer when people lost. The game was $3. Even though I worked full-time hours, I only got paid part-time pay. We were constantly understaffed, and when minimum wage went up, the park chose to fire people rather than increase pay. F you, Wonderland. Story 42. Not a worker, but was at Cedar Point the day a guy got decapitated while trying to get his cell phone back on the Raptor. There was a huge crowd by the front of the park, and I originally thought LeBron James or someone famous was at the park until we learned from a friend back home that someone had died at the park. It hasn't really ever haunted me to this day. The guy made an idiotic mistake, but I do feel sad for the family. They have restricted areas for a reason, so it's a good reminder to everyone that anything that falls in there is gone. Story 43. Late as heck for this and will probably get buried. I've been groundskeeping at a children's amusement park for over 2 years. The worst thing I've ever seen in person was when a mother had a miscarriage as she was ordering food at one of the food stands. Blood everywhere. The ambulance had to come and take the poor woman away. One time, somebody ate a LSD-laced Jolly Rancher. They started tripping too hard and the ambulance took them away. Edit. It's apparent that I don't know too much about psychedelics. Story 44. Work security at a Six Flags. The thing that sticks out the most to me was around 13 years ago, on the 4th of July. I went with a group of other security officers to help out at Hurricane Harbor since they had more guests than usual show up. Come to find out, the increased attendance was because of a radio station that was banned from Six Flags, announced that rapper Mike Jones and his crew were going to be at Hurricane Harbor that day, and the station was awarding tickets they didn't have to listeners. So what ends up happening is that a bunch of different street gangs decide to show up so they could hang out with Mike Jones. So the place to hang out is the wave pool. Every 45 minutes there's a 15-minute safety break where everyone has to leave the wave pool. When this happens, most people just get in the lazy river that flows around the wave pool. Well, during one of these safety breaks, all of a sudden I start hearing people simultaneously yelling, "Aye! Aye! Aye!" And then I see all kinds of people running. Next thing I know, there is a gang fight in the lazy river. Well, one of the first things we're taught to do is never get in the middle of a group fight because they will stop fighting each other and start fighting you. Well, a Hurricane Harbor security officer decides to ignore all that and jumps in and gets his butt kicked. I think he actually got yelled at more for getting his radio wet than for getting beaten up. There were a few more fights after that, so then the park called the police to send more officers to help. We ended up having the local SWAT team out there helping out. Every safety break after that had us in high alert for people fighting. People were floating in the lazy river during the safety breaks, just looking at us and bragging about all the trouble that was going on, and the fact that the SWAT team was there because they were so, quote, crunk. I remember going home that night just being mad at people in general and wondering how they got off on acting a fool. Every year after that, there was always a group of Six Flags security officers that were sent to Hurricane Harbor specifically to help out with the wave pool in Lazy River on July 4th, no matter how many people were in attendance that day. I have not been to any amusement park since I quit because of stuff like that, and do not plan on going anytime soon. Story 45. I used to work at the Jurassic Park River Adventure Ride at Universal Orlando. I've seen a few and heard of a few stories. One I've seen was someone got out of the boat right after the Ultrasaur part and just walked off the boat and stood there at the platform with a look of, now what? Our guys on camera didn't notice him because he got off at a part where the camera can't see you too well. Turns out, the guy was having a panic attack and decided that's what he needed to do. Guy watching cameras was either fired or transferred, which was too bad because he was really cool. One story I've heard of was during Grad Bash where people from university take over the park for a night. We had a girl fall out of the boat by the Ultrasaur Lagoon, and nobody said anything, and we didn't see it on our end. Ride was crapped down looking for this girl, and no one found out where she was until at the end of the night, where she turned up for the bus to ride home. Turns out she was found walking around backstage, soaking wet, and was escorted back into the park. No one had told us until after the event was over. Some minor ones are the amount of people who won't take their hats off on the ride, and I being there when the T-Rex attacks you, I have to stop the boat from going down the hill until hats come off. Also, if you go on YouTube, you can see a video where someone jumped in the part of the ride to go retrieve their hat right where the boats land. Safe to say they were banned from returning to the park ever again. Edit. Forgot to mention that when the CEO of Comcast rode the ride, his boat had sank and had to be rescued. Story 46. I work a roller coaster that has since been remodeled in a resort in California. I had a train pull into the station. A guest sitting in the middle of the train was passed out, and his friends were freaking out. I told them to leave their friend in the train. We got the ride crapped down, and the guest started having a grand mal seizure. Bit his tongue, blood spraying everywhere. His buddies told me to do something, get him off the train. They were panicking. I told them to leave him be till the seizure passes. It's better he hits his head on the fiberglass than the concrete, and don't hold him. It can injure the person having the seizure as well as the person trying to restrain him. Every once in a while, when a guest tries to be funny and pretend to be passed out as a train pulls into the station, I switch into emergency mode, getting ready to spring into action for another seizure. Story 47. Worked as a caricature artist at Hershey Park as a teenager. I had been working 2 weeks and was 15 years old. A family comes to our stand and just stands under our pop-up umbrellas. That's not allowed, so pushing back my terrible social anxiety, that job did wonders to help me come out of my shell, really. I told them that unless they were looking to have a caricature done, that they would have to leave. They said that they were just waiting for someone and that it would be fine. Not wanting to argue with them, I gave them another option. Since their daughter was already sitting next to my drawing station, I offered to draw her while they waited so that I could practice, and if interested, they could buy it when I was done. That was a legitimate sales practice, we were taught. I finished this drawing and asked if they would like it, and he says, sure, bag it up. Per our policy, giving away practice drawings only costs $10, so that's what I informed the father the price would be. And boy, oh boy, did he rip me a new one. He went on and on about how I had the gall to waste his time and not give him the drawing for free. It happened almost 10 years ago now, so I don't really remember anything word for word, just the general idea and tone. Oh, and that he threatened to call security on me for wasting his time. He threatened to have me fired. At the age of 15 and having only worked 2 weeks total in my life, I was terrified. Maybe that's why I started hating people before I graduated. Story 48. I was the team leader, shift manager pretty much, for one of those raft water rides that sits 12 people on a giant inner tube. The child that was maybe 12 or 13 years old had a seizure while going down the final drop. Because he wasn't going to be able to get out of the vehicle, we pressed the emergency stop, which drained all the water, and we removed everyone on the ride. As I was waiting for the EMTs to come and help with the child, I got a call on my radio to report to the top of the lift right away for another emergency. I run full speed through the ride and up the 5 stories worth of stairs to get to the top. The vehicle at the top had gone over the crest, but for some reason did not drop into the water, so the boat was literally teetering on the lift. If it had fallen, it would have been about a 10-foot drop on solid concrete. I had to lead my team in evacuating the entire section of the park while EMTs treating the kid with the seizure, and now the fire department coming to help get these people off the ride safely while rocking the strongest poker face I've had to keep ever. The conversation with the people on the boat on the lift went something like this. Is everything okay? Yeah, we're just having some technical difficulties. We unfortunately need to remove everyone from the ride, so just please remain seated and we'll get you out in no time. Why can't we get off now? Your boat stopped in a weird spot, so we just need to wait for someone to come tie the boat off. Are we in danger? No, not at all. But for all that is holy, don't bounce around too much, and please ignore the news helicopter in the sky. Story 49. Worst injury I witnessed was at our go-kart track. At the end of the ride, you pulled your cart back into the pit area in one of 3 lanes. If you were a jerk, then you came flying into the pit and would slam into the cart in front of you. It was a really busy after-prom party. A ride attendant was stepping around a cart to help someone out, and bam! They're rammed from behind, and the poor attendant's ankle is crushed between the bumpers. I vividly remember him screaming while they were attempting to get his shoe off then. Story 50. I'm not and never was an employee, but I do have a super terrible story. So I live in a pretty small town. Small as in the only reason it exists is a casino. We have a carnival every year. For those of you who frequent carnivals, the ride The Zipper may ring a bell. Due to the operator being drunk, he forgot to secure the gate that closed in the lap bar. Unfortunately, this caused 2 teenage girls to fall out. One died instantly. The other will spend the rest of her life in a wheelchair and will never walk again. And still, the ride operates, and the same operator works there, just for a different ride. Story 51. I'm not an employee, but I have a story I did that I think could have resulted in my death. The only local amusement park I've went to a lot as a kid. A great ride I loved was you get in an old-fashioned car and you ride around a bit of the park's vegetation, so no one sees you, but you see some of the park. That's all 6-year-old me needed to be happy. So one day, it's me, my older brother, like 8 at the time, and my cousin, like 7. We're riding and the car stops. We wait for a good 15 seconds, and since the tracks were secluded, people couldn't see us. So the natural thing we did was get out of the car. These didn't have any seatbelts or large metal rails that came down to secure you. You're just sitting in a slow-moving car. But all 3 of us think it's a good idea to get out and walk the rest of the tracks out. It was easy because we rode it so many times, but at some point the ride started back up again. And as we exited where the cars come back, the girl running the ride asked us where the car was. She was completely baffled and she was just a teenager, and we just kind of said, the ride stopped, and we got out. But as we were telling her this, a good 6 seconds after we exited where the car comes out, the car arrived. None of us heard that it was fairly close behind. This happened roughly 11 years ago. The ride is still up today. I've never seen it stop like that again, and if we were a little slower / waited a little longer, I definitely think one of us could have gotten straight up run over. And at age 6, I think it could have resulted in death. Okay, so why were you allowed to ride this ride without adult supervision? A, by whatever adults you went to the park with, and B, by park employees that, apparently don't give a crap if 6-year-olds are, riding on rides unattended, and I don't know, that seems like major lack of foresight by the adults in this scenario. Anyway, story 52. Somebody with HIV/AIDS went down the water slide of our not yet released Thundergun Express with just a water bottle to pre-wet the slides. And the dude slid down with skid burns all in his back, which of course went everywhere in the common pool. And it turns out they were faking the whole thing so they can cut the queue to the entire park. Story 53. At Thorpe Park, there's this giant swing ride called Rush. It's basically a pair of 80-foot swinging arms with seats that swing straight up and out and then do the same the other way. At the height of one of its swings, the part where the riders are seated is directly above one of the main paths through the park, and the route I take every day to get to the canteen for lunch. In 2008, I'd walk past it as I did every day, when all of a sudden, I heard a commotion behind me. I turned around to see a group of people huddled around this great big piece of metal that had fallen off the ride 80 feet, straight through the holes in the safety net, onto the path where a bunch of people had been standing taking photos and videos of the ride and watching their friends. It had fallen right where I'd been walking, like 15 seconds earlier. We also had a ride called Stealth, which was a powered start roller coaster that went from 0 to 90 in about 2 seconds, and then straight up 200 feet, over a hill and back down. It used to fail to make it over the hill and roll back down it backwards into the station. Luckily, it had really good magnetic brakes to catch it when it did this. We also had a ride called the Slammer that was essentially 2 huge square plates covered in seats at the ends of these long horizontal arms. The whole setup would lift into the air and then flip you around and around like someone with a pancake in a pan spinning their arm around like they're trying to keep water in a bucket. Just after it opened, it got stuck halfway through a cycle and left 100 people hanging upside down 60 feet in the air for an hour. People were passing out and being sick. It was a crap show. Story 54. Pretty sure this will get buried, but was a mod for a place with a very large trolley-type ride. Driver had epilepsy but didn't tell me. He had a seizure driving the thing, which was full of children on a field trip from daycare, some with special needs, several pregnant women, and an older lady who broke her back so severely that she spent months in a specialized hospital. In traction. I still have bad dreams about the sight of the trolley half stuck in a lake, and the children sitting on the ground crying with the broken back woman screaming for help. I didn't know this was a remote possibility, or I'd never have put him in the driver's seat. Story 55. Former Disney employee here in Epcot. Working the end of a busy day in a restaurant with only a few tables left, we heard a scream from the woman's washroom. As I went over to investigate, a man ran out and through a side door before running into the crowds in the park. Guy was standing in a stall watching women from above pee. Gross. Guy was never caught, and the Disney police basically did F, all because it's not the image they want to portray. Story 56. I used to work at a park that focused on animal attractions, kind of like SeaWorld, but not. For a few months, we've been hearing about this new dinosaur that's completely unique and is supposed to be a huge hit with the visitors. One day shortly before this attraction was to be opened, the animal somehow got out of its cage and into other paddocks. What it didn't kill had free roam of the island. Of course, management wanted to maximize their profits, so they put off calling an emergency until the last minute, resulting in a number of casualties. Needless to say, that was the last day of operation. I'm trying to make sense of this here. It sounds like he's implying that an actual dinosaur got set loose or got out into other paddocks at this amusement park. So care to elaborate on that a little bit more? Real dinosaur? Real Jurassic Park? Come on, spill the tea. Story 57. I worked in a German amusement park for 6 months. My job was to relieve other ride operators so they could go on break. That also meant I had to know how to operate every single ride in the park. A lot of the time I wasn't instructed how a ride really worked. It was more of a press that button to start and you can figure out the rest. So naturally, one of the roller coasters got stuck and I had no clue on how to evacuate, so I called the park mechanics, who were understaffed, and took nearly 20 minutes to get there. And all the time, people were panicking and I couldn't even tell them what was going on since I couldn't get to them. Of course, they were pissed when they finally got out. After that, I refused to work rides without being shown how to effing evacuate them. Actually, that park had a lot of problems. In my 6 months, 2 ride operators got fired because they were drunk. One because he took his shirt off, and there were a lot of times when people got no breaks or had to operate 2 rides at the same time. And then they opened their new swing carousel, which I got as my main ride since I was the only one without my own ride who had been there for longer than 3 months. So I start my new job and again got the minimum instruction, coupled with the fact that everyone seemed really unsure what the height requirements were or who in general could ride it. Oh, and it was surrounded by a moat without fences, so after you were done swinging around being dizzy, you were less than a meter away from falling in the water, which happened at least once every 2 weeks. And not only to guess, I managed it once as well, as did my mechanic. Story 58. The worst I can think of was an employee that wandered into a restricted area in the morning while checking all the emergency stops and was basically decapitated by the train. No one knows why she was in there, and the bloodstain was still pretty visible as of a couple years ago. A guest was also killed by a train because he jumped the fence to retrieve a lost hat. As for non-lethal, an employee jumped off the tracks onto the ground one day and completely busted both of his legs on impact. Also, while doing a safety ride on a smaller coaster in the morning, a giant metal hook was hanging down right at head level. Thankfully, I ducked in time and frantically motioned the crew not to load the guests as soon as I arrived back. On the same ride, also during a morning safety ride, a water ride above had broken and was pouring a waterfall above our track. Spent the whole day soaked. There are many more incidents at this park, but these occurred in the 5 years that I worked there. Oddly enough, still the funnest job I've ever had. Story 59. Kids projectile vomiting from the heat/junk food. Drunk AF parents/adults who are pissed off from the heat, their kids having to walk, etc. On a sadder note, having to call security on parents who are just straight up abusing their kids. I've only had to do that twice in my 3 years of amusement park working, which is good, I think, but it sticks with you how awful people can be to their kids. Story 60. Amusement park in the mid-90s, like a giant putt-putt. 1. Idiot puts token in batting cage machine. Ball comes out, swings at ball and misses. Proceeds to bend over and pick up ball. Hit in the side of the head by 65 mph baseball with no helmet. Part of his suit in court was that he didn't know there would be more than one ball. Go-kart tracks are designed so that they are narrow enough that you cannot turn your go-kart around. However, genius idiots figured out that you could have your buddy do the fishtail maneuver to get you turned all the way around. Idiots would then proceed to drive down the track full speed the wrong way and ram people. This happened frequently. One time this happened at the crest of a small hill, and one go-kart managed to ride up on top of the other go-kart and into the second rider's chest. 3. Idiots will try and tee off on the putt-putt course. Ball goes airborne and hits people. 4. Not the park I worked at, but another one had a bumper boat pond with dyed water, so you couldn't see how nasty it was. That was all good until some kid fell in and drowned because nobody could find him to save him in time. 5. Manager closing the store down at night, going to drop off the day's cash at the bank. Someone with a gun tries to stop him in the parking lot after he's in his car. Ran his ass clean over. Guy who got rammed apparently wound up on the hood of the car yelling at the driver to stop, who slammed on the brakes, forcing the driver to fly off the car. Manager then drives around the person and off to the bank. No crimes were reported and the robber was not seen again. Story 61. I'm still employed, so I won't go into too much detail about exactly what park I work at. However, I will say we use the IROC system. It's a somewhat controversial safety system around the amusement park community that, although very thorough and extensive when it comes to keeping everybody safe, IMO is hated for the same reasons. With this, many guests tend to question our practices and complain about certain rules we have in place because it cuts into wait times for the rides. For instance, I was opening at one of my circle rides last year, and not even my first cycle in, I have a father and son come up to me as I'm checking seatbelts. He asks why I can't let him on, and according to our protocol, we cannot let any other guests on while checking. He passively-aggressively responds with, it's like you're keeping us here like we're prisoners. I eventually let them on, and he says nothing after. There were many seats left available, but I just couldn't let them on. Another time, I had 2 disabled guest passes at the same time, at the same ride as the last story. And according to the policy, I can only let one group with the passes on at a time, given total capacity for the ride was not very much. The woman behind the first group with her grandkids got upset and called it discrimination for whatever reason. If it was somehow racial, I don't see how it could be, since herself and I were white and the first group was black, so she demanded a manager and they settled the issue. I love being an operator as a summer job since it pays well for school/bills/extra expenses versus the others I work in the off-season. Although what they say in retail applies to practically every other job that requires you to speak to a customer, you can't let one bad apple spoil the rest of your day.